All right, so there it is. It's pretty much done. Let me back up and you can kind of get the whole cabinet in there. My Marvel vs. Capcom 2 arcade machine. And since I've been doing a couple of videos throughout the building process, I figure I'll do one last one to kind of show you the whole finished project here. I'll just turn the sound down real quick. Alright, so as I kind of mentioned in the previous videos, I wanted to go for kind of a true arcade experience. So I grew up in the arcades and, you know, anyone who knows me, I wasn't really like a really athletic person. I wasn't into sports and stuff like that. So the arcade is where I went, made a lot of friends, hung out all the time, and got really competitive. And Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was kind of the pinnacle of that. Came out in the year 2000. In the arcades and Dreamcast, and it was really kind of the last stop before arcades pretty much disappeared from my life for one reason or another. You know, they weren't commonplace anymore. You would still see them in movie theaters and stuff like that, but this was like kind of the pinnacle of that before everything just went to home consoles. And so I really wanted to have the real Marvel vs. Capcom 2 experience in my house. And there are definitely easier ways to do things than I'm showing you here. There's Raspberry Pi can even emulate most old arcade games. There's a program out there called MAME, M-A-M-E, Multi-Arcade Machine Emulator, and that basically does software emulation of old arcade hardware and gives you kind of an actual true-to-life feel, down to the fact that you have to insert coins, and usually it's just pushing a button to insert the coin. But I took kind of a different route for that. For most people, Raspberry Pis, PC emulators would be enough, but I wanted the real arcade experience in my house. And so I couldn't actually go out and get the machines themselves. They're still very big and very expensive, but the hardware that came in the machines that played these games is actually relatively inexpensive. When you think about it, for a lot of the stuff for arcades, it's big, it's bulky, you can get the hardware. And so with this was the Sega Naomi system. And the Sega Naomi is basically running the exact same hardware as the Dreamcast. It's just got more memory to handle things like better sound, and you could daisy chain these systems together for multiple monitor experience and things like that. And as you can see here, I've got a couple extra games with it that I can pop in and out. It was very modular, which was really kind of the way that things were going around the turn of the century there. So up until that point, if you go back to like Mortal Kombat or something, you have a board in it, and the entire board looks like your old parents' 486 computer without the hardware around it, without the case around it. And those would get shoved into an arcade board and connected, and I'll show you the connections in a second here. But moving towards the 2000s, the late 90s, the mid 90s, the idea of more modular arcade systems came into play, where you really could keep the same hardware and just swap out the games. And Sega Naomi by far wasn't the first to do that. One of the most popular examples I can think of is the Neo Geo MVS system. Neo Geo made Samurai Showdown, Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, and if you remember going to the arcade, you could go and see a Neo Geo MVS system. There were arcade cabinets where you could select between the games, and it was Neo Geo games. So you could maybe play Metal Gear Solid, or you could play Samurai Showdown, King of Fighters on the same game. And I believe they went in like 1, 2, and 4 packs. So you'd have arcade machines that had 1 game, had 2 games, and had 4 games. So the Sega Naomi didn't take exactly that same idea. It is modular, but you can only play 1 game at a time. And basically removing the game from the system clears the memory on it, wipes out all the high scores, all the save data, and things like that. And so putting in a new game wasn't something that you would do very often. But for collectors now, it actually really works out. And the Naomi system itself, the board here, you can kind of see. I'm sorry it's very dark back here, but you can kind of see the board itself. It's just almost like a Super Nintendo plug-and-play cartridge kind of thing. And the boards themselves actually on eBay are relatively inexpensive if you want to get started on something like this. I've seen them as low, in good condition, as low as $49, $40 or so. I think I paid about $60 for one that had a extra fan in it and some other things that came with the game here. I've got Capcom versus SNK, Power Stone, which again, you know, we mostly associate with the home consoles, but it actually was an arcade game. And then there's an extra ROM chip, so you know, have to flash the BIOS and things like that on your motherboard to update them. It wasn't handled like that. You weren't plugging this into a PC and updating the software. You would have to get an actual chip from the manufacturer, and they would send it, and you would get a different one based on whether US or Japan. For example, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 out of the box is Japanese. When you boot it up, it's in Japanese, and it actually has a warning on the front that says this is only meant to be played Japan. But I pop a chip like that into the Sega Naomi, and it translates it to English. I don't have to get a separate cartridge for it. Just the chip determines the locality of where it's going to be played. All right, and down here, some extra buttons and things like that. I went with a kind of a joystick style that everybody knows here. You can kind of see that a little bit. But I did get some other styles of joystick just in case I ever felt like changing them out later. Sanwa is competition ready. If you look at the joysticks that are in use, even for consoles these days that are being played at like Evo and things like that, they're most likely using the Sanwa joysticks. And the only reason I didn't go for this one is because the cabinet I got, it cut off some area, and I'll show you what I mean, but this wouldn't have protruded far enough for me to really enjoy using it. So I went with a lengthier joystick that made more sense on this particular cabinet. Some backup buttons and stuff. So basically, back in the 80s, there was a bunch of people, organizations in Japan got together that were making arcade machines and said, all right, let's all get together and get on the same page about the connections that we're using to basically unifying this. And there was an organization called JAMA, Japan Amusement Machine and Marketing Association, JAMMA. It standardized the connections for arcade machines across the board. Started in Japan, of course, which is where most of the arcade machines came from and still do. You don't see them much in the United States anymore unless you're, again, like in a movie theater or something, or specialized arcade. There's lots of bars now that go out and pick up retro arcade machines. But they standardized the connection type. And so really connecting all of these buttons together to a board, really it was just a matter of having a harness like this, which has all the connections on it, and then this, which just slides into the board, and it's called a JAMA connection. So I got a spare cable back here, and everything, as you can see, is kind of just focus. Done with numbers, and you would read the guide, and numbers would plug into the corresponding slot on these buttons, and then this would plug into the board. So you could swap out boards pretty easily without having to buy an entire new cabinet. I've got some a backup joystick. This is the actual joystick I'm using now, if you've never kind of seen the whole thing here before. What happens is this goes into a slot, and this bottom portion where you can see that little fixture right there is what bumps into this guy and gives you that good old click sound that you're used to hearing from arcade games. So if you've never seen the underside of an arcade board before, or arcade machine before, it's actually a relatively simple setup. All the buttons are the same thing. They have these mounted on them. These connections run into the JAMA board, which runs into the game. There's just a little back part when you push the button down. Gives you that old comfortable click. So you can easily swap out buttons. You can easily swap out connections, change things. I went with a very basic color set, but it's possible that you could also go with buttons that light up and things like that. Now, one of the kind of interesting things there is I went with a 6-button layout for the actual controllers. Overall, this layout is 12, 14. So there's 6 on each side, a 1-player start and a 2-player start. You can also get games that have like trackballs and stuff like that. I didn't do that. I'm running kind of more of the original arcade experience. The one thing that this cabinet is missing right now is that rubber bezel that goes around the edge. T-molding, it's called. It's actually more difficult to get into the cabinet than I had anticipated, and I was afraid that hammering away at it, I might have been doing some structural damage to the wood that this is made out of. So I'll have to revisit that portion of the project. So right now, you can kind of see it's a little bit naked on the outer edges because it doesn't have that T-molding. I'll figure out how to get that in there someday. It's really not important at this point because it doesn't add anything except, prevents it from scuffing up your wall if anything bumps into it. All right, so this is the actual arcade machine here itself running Marvel vs. Capcom 2 in the Sega Naomi, and it's the English version. This back so you can see the guts. All right, so for the sound, turn this back up real quick. You get solid sound out of it. It's an arcade machine. You're not going for surround sound or anything like that. It's really just running.
Marvel vs. Capcom 2. New Age of Heroes.
Focus. All right, doesn't want to focus. There you go. It's a little 4-inch car speaker. That's all it is. And it's connected to an amp in the back right here. And the amp isn't very expensive at all. This is like a $10 amp off Amazon. And the speakers I got were $10 for both of them. So really the entire sound system for this thing cost about 20 bucks. And all of this runs behind here. Now it's not, I guess, the 100% purest version of this because I am running this off of a LCD monitor. It's just a cheap computer monitor I picked up for less than 100 bucks, an old Acer style. So even though this is in 4:3, because that's the aspect ratio of the actual game itself, it's running on a widescreen monitor. So for some people, that kind of takes away from the purest experience of you all. All right, now down there is the actual Naomi itself. Right, Marvel vs. Capcom 3. It's a little loud just because this has an older fan in it and I need to purchase a new one. I just haven't had a chance to find an older model fan like that yet, but I will. Works right now, it vents everything nicely. And then this is the actual connection. So right down at the bottom you can see all these wires coming out of the bottom of this. So the Naomi via USB and some extra wiring connects to this guy right here. Let me see if I can get some light over here. There you go, that's better. Alright, and then there's all your buttons and controllers and things like that. So really it seems like a lot, and it's a little daunting the first time you take a crack at it, but it's very easy because the JAMA harness does the rest, so you don't really have to worry about soldering anything. It's just plug and play for the most part. Down in the corner here is our power supply, and I have a power strip that's running everything. Now back in the day with the arcade machine, the JAMA harness would power everything. It would carry the sound, it would carry the power to the actual monitor itself. It powers this system, so you would only need a single on button. Now again, I didn't go for that CRT experience, so I need a separate power for the monitor, and I'm using a special amp, so I had to get power strip back here to get everything on reliably. Okay. And then down below it, you can actually buy JAMA game boards that are multi, 800 games in one. And that has everything from Pac-Man to Donkey Kong, all the way up through the SNK era. It's got all the Samurai Showdowns, King of Fighters, and up to like about Marvel vs. Capcom. You're not going to get any 3D fighters on there. No Virtua Fighter, no Tekken. It's only got Mortal Kombat 1. It doesn't even go up to Mortal Kombat 2 or 3. And so that's the thing about emulation, a true emulation, multiple arcade machine emulator, is that despite the fact that some of these games are over 20 years old, modern computer and modern processing, home processing at least, can't play them reliably if you're doing a true emulation. Because some of these arcade boards, had multiple boards at the same time. Good examples like San Francisco Rush. You don't see San Francisco Rush or NFL Blitz on here because they had really complex at the time machines, and it was an entire cabinet dedicated to just doing that. And so even modern computers can't reliably emulate it. They can emulate the home console version just fine because you can emulate a PlayStation or Dreamcast, but the actual original arcade experience doesn't live up so well. So even these multi-arcade game boards have their limitations and only go so far. And then so, again, everything under there is connected. I am terrible about cable management, but I will clean this up at some point. So I can get this focused. There we go. And the actual arcade itself, this whole cabinet was by Monster Arcades. And so there's a lot of kits out there, and you can go whichever way you want to. For the most popular one, I think, is the bar top arcade, because it's just, it takes up less space in the house. But I wanted the full stand-up machine. But this isn't even still kind of full size. This doesn't even match up to the size of the original Marvel vs. Capcom arcade machine. It's a little bit smaller, shorter by a couple of inches, thinner, and the control panel does not protrude as much as the one, the original arcade one does. So this is a slightly smaller, over there, reproduction, and it doesn't have any of the graphics. The best I got was the light up sign on the top, and there's a guy on eBay that kind of custom makes these and sells them pretty cheap. It was like 18 bucks, and shipped it to my house, and it fit right in there. So that is the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 machine. Again, I've got another board back there so I can switch the connections with just the pop of a couple of plugs if I'm having a party and people want to play more varied game set. And this is set on to free play. I could put this in for quarters and put a quarter machine up front. A lot of extra work that I didn't want to. I was really only concerned with the game. So with the free play, I get my characters. And actually, this is the funny thing, is that cheat games exist on arcades as well. You just have to have access to the board. So this is just up and running. It doesn't have all of the characters unlocked. You can see all of the question marks around the edge. Through a couple of button presses on the hardware. This is not something you could walk into an arcade and just do with, these buttons right here. But there's basically a menu button type thing on the back of the Sega Naomi. And I do certain menu items in a particular order, it can unlock all the characters. So that'll be my next project, but there we go. It's all set up. You can hear those clicks. Always love those clicks. And again, for most people, emulation is going to be the way to go. I opted to choose the actual game that meant a lot to me, that I played with a lot of my friends when I was younger. Hopefully they'll come over and we can throw some tournaments in my house. But all in all, this is definitely a disposable income project. I collected pieces for years. The last big piece was the arcade cabinet, which was by far the most expensive. I think if you really want to get into this and it's something that you've been mulling over and, Dreamcast era games are up your alley, Sega Naomi, relatively easy to get on eBay, inexpensive. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, people will try to nickel and dime you for it, take you, to the cleaners. They'll sell it for $300-$400. But honestly, if you wait around and you're patient, you'll find someone selling one in great condition for like $150. I got mine for about $150 with the ROM chip that translates it into English. So if you see any on there that are, asking for like $300 or best offer, go ahead and throw your best offer in there around $150, maybe $200, just depending on the condition. So the actual hardware, not really expensive itself. It's the arcade cabinet that really took me the most saving, because this ships complete and it had to ship freight. You can buy ones that come in pieces. Their reviews vary. Right now, Japan and, surprisingly enough, the UK really seem to have the best options. The people in the UK and Japan, though, don't always ship to the United States, and if they do, that's extremely expensive. So for your US options, I can't, recommend Monster Arcade enough. It came with a couple of chips, and there was a dent. That could have just happened during the freight process. But overall, I'm quite pleased with the cabinet itself. The monitor's just an Acer, and the button pieces, the JAMA harness, and all the JAMA controllers, you can find on Amazon. And if you live in a city that does next day shipping, I got a lot of this within 24 hours of ordering it. So it's not quite as rare as I thought it would be to be able to get these pieces together and actually assemble everything all set up. Just again, the cabinet being the biggest portion of it. But there it is, my Marvel vs. Capcom 2 experience. If you're sitting on the bench about this and money's not the object holding you back, it's just whether or not you think you'd have any fun with this. This whole project's been a blast, and it's been very educational for me. I learned a lot about the arcade machines that I played growing up, including other games that aren't here. Did a lot of research going into it. So, highly recommend it, and there's a ton of information out on YouTube. I'm not doing this for like training purposes or anything like that. There's people that know far more about this than me, and if you're interested in it, I can recommend their videos and show you some of the stuff I saw on YouTube. Learned everything online pretty easily. So, this is it. Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Thanks for watching.